Hello and welcome to another episode of Salt Air. My name is Tom Hatch, the creator of Salt and CTO of SaltStack. With me today, I have John Carty, one of our sales directors, and we wanted to talk a little bit about what SaltStack means from an enterprise level, what it means to use SaltStack to solve some of those more difficult initiatives that need to be deployed inside of infrastructure. John, can you tell us a little about yourself, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks very much, Tom. Thanks for having me on. So John Carty. I run New England, Eastern Canada, and the U.S. federal government for SaltStack. I've been here for about a year. My background's actually technical. I have an engineering degree, come out of the software development environment in Unix and high-performance data systems. Did that for about 8 or 9 years in Greater Boston, and then I co-founded a boutique systems integrator that partners and I ran for about 18 years. Also in Metro Boston. So we did a lot of integration with what I consider to be the early generation of what SaltStack is today, the IBM Tivolis and BMC Patrols and CA Unicenters of the world. Spent a lot of time trying to get to what SaltStack does now. So it was a lot of fun to come over here and actually use a tool set that does it right.
No, that's fantastic. So if we start by looking at what are the big problems that these companies are trying to solve and how we can apply Salt to it. What does that look like in your experience, John?
So there are a couple of things. The first thing is when we look at what SaltStack does as a product, right, we can break it into a couple of places. At the endpoint, whether that's a desk or a server or a virtual machine or a cloud instance or a network device, we do intelligent automation. So we automate things to happen on the endpoint, which is great. We do that at scale, and we do it in a very low human touch way. And in addition to that, we provide the ability to orchestrate those kinds of activities across small groups, large groups, or entire fleets of infrastructure. So in providing that capability, I'm finding that our audiences generally break into 3 classic silos. There are the DevOps or infrastructure operations folks who own servers and desktops and VM and cloud, generally speaking. There are the network operations folks who tend to own the components that make up the network fabric and possibly the security and perimeter protection fabric. And then the third audience is the security and operations group, who don't actually own equipment, but they do own the initiatives for defining what compliance means. What does it mean to be safe? What are our compliance standards? How do we make sure we're up to speed? And then those folks need to communicate with the other two. So as we talk to the leadership in those 3 organizations, we're finding that there are several initiatives that sort of strike a common chord across the enterprises, and it helps to get them all speaking the same language.
Yeah, so what do those common initiatives look like in your experience?
So if we start sort of from left to right, in the DevOps space, the phrase site reliability engineering, or SRE, will resonate with a lot of infrastructure operations folks. Comes out of Google, actually, back when they started the site reliability engineering disciplines. The site that they were trying to engineer reliability into was google.com, that site. So Ben Traynor and his team took a look at what's involved in keeping the site up and running. And as they had a lot of software come flying over the wall at them from the Google development team, and of course, as the spread of Google and the demands for availability and performance and so on just continue to go up, there was a recognition that there was a need to manage the site with an engineering component to it. And Ben actually wrote a great book on this topic, and one of my favorite references in there. He said something like, SRE is what happens when you apply software engineering to traditional operations. As a software engineer by background, maybe I'm a little biased, but I thought that was a very cool way to look at keeping systems up and running, and starting with arguably one of the most demanding environments out there at google.com. So SRE and taking DevOps initiatives into a site reliability engineering approach, that's a pretty common thread for the infrastructure folks. Jump over to the network side of the house, and we find one of the phrases that gets kicked around a lot going back to the open network days is the software-defined network. So the ability to manage a network infrastructure. Now, we're not talking about servers. We're talking about much smaller devices. many of which are not agentable and have extremely tiny operating footprints, but their configuration still needs to be managed. Firmware settings, the operating system level is provided by the Ciscos and Junipers of the world. So the concept of a software-defined network in the network space resonates because, again, we have more and more devices to manage and fewer people per device to manage them. And then finally, we come back to the connecting point in the middle, security and compliance. If you look at the initiatives around continuous compliance, which will resonate with a lot of security shops, the whole idea there is, look, we've got a desired state. We have a set of end states we'd like our entire company to be at, which defines what we mean by being compliant. That could be regulatory compliance. It could be cybersecurity compliance. There's a number of things that come together. But those are kind of the three big threads: site reliability engineering on the infrastructure side, software-defined network on the network side, and continuous compliance with security.
Well, that's a fantastic overview. But not only is it a fantastic overview, but it ties in really nicely to what we have been doing and what we are doing at SaltStack. It's really important to be able to tie these things together. So many of the solutions out there are disparate, and they solve numerous point solutions inside of the pipeline. But for us to really create something like DevOps that spans also security, we need to be able to make those tools that can span the needs and the requirements of those separate teams so that they can also achieve those high-level goals that you're talking about to actually deliver reliability. So again, from out in the field, what does that look like when people are actually deploying Salt to solve these problems?
So it's really kind of interesting to watch how it's done, because you're right. There are a lot of tools they're really aimed at the audience rather than at the problem. But what some of our senior executives have come to realize, that managing configuration and automation in infrastructure and in networking and in security, even though there are different tools, different endpoints, and different languages, it's much the same job. It comes down to, do we have the ability to design or define a desired end state, and can we do that in such a way that doesn't require a ton of engineering technical support? And can we use that state, and can we automate around the state and around APIs so that we can have a software-based interface? And what we're finding in our customers, because, and you and I had this conversation when we first met, SaltStack solved the hard problems first. The problems of having ubiquitous, idempotent, cross-platform automation. That's hard to do. It's hard to build something that's easy to operate. Not to minimize what you all have done here, but this is sort of the automatic transmission of software. It's fairly easy to operate once it's in place. So what that means is the network teams, the infrastructure teams, the cloud teams, and the security teams, they can all be speaking a common language that's about their problem at company X, and not about the particular flavor of tool they're accustomed to using. And that's really sort of been the big aha for our friends that own infrastructure or own network. They actually are responsible for the infrastructure. They've now got the ability to do state management and event management and orchestration in a very cross-platform, high-volume, idempotent way. That all by itself is a huge benefit. But then they can begin talking about the end states and the desired state of their piece of the infrastructure in the context of either software reliability engineering or the software-defined network. Or the big win nowadays is we can get both groups talking with their peers in security, and everybody's talking about end state. They're talking about code. It really is it's almost infrastructure as code for everybody, which is a pretty exciting thing.
Oh yeah, the reality is that as these infrastructures get more and more complicated, we need to make sure that there is engineering on every level, and we're seeing that engineering aspect permeate outside of development in a big way. And what you're talking about with being able to present all of these different teams that same platform to be able to solve what are effectively very similar problems under the hood, but trying to make sure that they can collaborate effectively in doing it. And you're right in saying that creating that idempotent system, the system that allows for not only stateful configuration, but also responding to events and sending out one-off changes and queries into your infrastructure really was my dream of making sure that we could abstract that complete view of what's going on inside of an infrastructure so that we can abstract it into that simple model of I need to push out changes, I need to ask questions of the infrastructure, I need to ensure it's in a viable state, but I also need to be able to respond to the events that happen in the infrastructure. And
Right.
that model that's the idea, is that model then allows us to solve these high-level issues, bring these teams together, and facilitate engineering across the lines to create better automation.
Well, I will tell you, it's working. You would have really enjoyed a fun dinner we had with a fairly large team from a major bank just last week. So just imagine we had the automation experts and the automation chiefs from each of infrastructure, security, and network, all at the same table, all ordering from the same appetizer menu. And as we started talking through what does infrastructure as code mean for infrastructure, because it's actually a named initiative, that service, this company's infrastructure as code internal offering, is being offered to the infrastructure teams and to the security and the NetOps teams, and they're using SaltStack to drive it. So in a sense, we are the engine behind infrastructure as code for this bank, which in turn is being consumed by not only infrastructure, but security network as well. Everyone at the table had been exposed to SaltStack over the last couple of months, and it was really kind of fun to see that everybody had a dog in the fight. They all had something they wanted to try or hash through or bounce off of their peers. So it's good fun. What you built is really starting to resonate across the organizations.
Well, that's fantastic. That was to have multiple teams sitting at the same table is really the dream of DevOps, and to be able to extend that original dream, that original philosophy of being able to better facilitate communication. Communication isn't something that just happens. Communication between teams when they're trying to get a job done happens when they're all working together, when they're all in the mud together getting a job done. And being able to give them the tools to work together is the way to facilitate it. And it is. I appreciate that. It's really exciting to see that dream come to life.
It's a new day. I mean, I can say as a former integrator, we used to joke in my business that we were the plumbers, and as long as there are at least a few leaky sinks somewhere in the development, we would all be kept busy. But so we spent a lot of time building patches and building, putting in custom piping and all that kind of stuff. And really, we never had any tool set, frankly, that could address all of the automation and orchestration requirements of any one silo, much less something that spanned all three of infrastructure, security, network. So it's a very different conversation. I will tell you that I frequently get from the senior executives we talk to the cross arms, I don't believe you, you're full of, prove it to me, which is great. I love those conversations because it's straightforward to prove. But we are getting some of these larger enterprises into conversations that they've either never had before or they've struggled with trying to patch together disparate tools that were really never meant to work together. So it's a fun new day in the enterprise infrastructure discussion.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, one of my favorite conversations was when I sat down and was explaining to somebody how to automate security in a reliable way. And he said, just stop right there. He said, you're lying to me. And then he said, the only way that you could pull that off is you would have to build. And then he went on to basically describe what salt is. I just started laughing, right? No, we already did that.
That's when you know you're talking to the right audience, when they can tell you what you're about to tell them.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. John, thanks a lot for being on. We've covered some great ground here. And I'm really excited to always hear how well we're doing out there. And also to know that we are able to achieve that goal of bringing these teams together, giving them automation, and facilitating them with engineering that makes their lives easier. Thanks, everyone, for watching. And thank you again for John Carty to be my guest today. And until
Tom,
next
thank
time.
you.